You've really let yourself go, Meredith. 5 words. That's all it took to shatter 4 decades of marriage. 5 words, delivered casually over breakfast, as if commenting on the weather. Not angry. Not even particularly cruel. Just matter of fact, accompanied by a dismissive glance at my body before he returned to his newspaper. I stared at my husband across our granite kitchen island, coffee cup suspended halfway to my lips, the French toast I'd made him congealing on bone china. That morning, I'd risen at 5:30 a.m. as I'd done for 40 years, applied the subtle makeup he preferred, styled my silver-streaked hair, and prepared his favorite breakfast. All while he slept in until 7. "I'm sorry." My voice remained steady, though something inside me cracked, the final hairline fracture in a foundation weakened by decades of similar comments. Richard lowered his Wall Street Journal just enough to give me another appraising look. The weight, the wrinkles, the gray. "I know we're getting older, but you could make more of an effort. Remember how you looked when we met?" I did remember. I was 25 then, a brilliant investment analyst my senior colleagues underestimated because of my youth, my gender, and my looks. Richard had been 30, already rising through the ranks at Bancroft and Mitchell, his family's prestigious firm. He'd fallen for my mind first, he always claimed. Then my beauty. Now, at 65, apparently only one of those attributes still mattered to him. I set my coffee down carefully, feeling strangely calm. "And you, Richard? Have you looked in the mirror lately?" His eyebrows shot up. In 40 years, I had never, not once, challenged his critical assessments of my appearance. "Excuse me? Your hairline has receded, your waistline has expanded, and those designer suits can't hide the fact that you have the posture of a question mark from hunching over your desk all these years," I observed, my tone as casual as it had been. But I've never mentioned it, because I thought our marriage was about more than physical appearance. His face darkened. "It was just an observation, Meredith. No need to get defensive." But as I watched him return to his newspaper, dismissing both me and the conversation, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about one comment or one morning. This was about 40 years of journals hidden in my closet, filled with similar observations. 40 years of managing his social calendar, his household, his image. 40 years of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. And 40 years of building my escape route, brick by careful brick, without him ever noticing. "You're right, Richard," I said, rising from my stool. "I have let myself go. And now, I'm going to let myself go completely." He didn't even look up from his newspaper. He had no idea that very soon his life would be unrecognizable, that I would be gone, that the joint accounts would be empty, that the beach house in Nantucket, my personal sanctuary purchased 15 years ago with money he didn't know I had, would finally become my home. Richard Bancroft was about to discover that the aging, fading wife he'd dismissed over breakfast was actually the most dangerous person he'd ever met. And I was about to become the woman I'd postponed being for 40 years. Subscribe now to hear how one woman's decades-long revenge plan unfolded after her husband's casual cruelty pushed her over the edge. This is a story about patience, power, and the price of underestimating the woman who knows all your secrets. April 15th, 1982. Married 1 week. Richard suggested I wear more makeup to the partners' dinner tonight. "You're beautiful, darling, but a little polish never hurts," he said. He doesn't realize I was wearing makeup, just not enough, apparently. I smiled and added another layer of everything. The women at dinner complimented my natural beauty, while their husbands talked business with Richard. He was pleased on the drive home, said I'd made a good impression. I've started this journal to remember these moments. Not because they hurt, they don't really, but because I suspect a pattern is forming. I should document it, analyze it, like I would a market trend. I kept that first leather-bound journal in a locked drawer in my vanity, along with the others that followed. One for each year of our marriage. 40 journals, meticulously documenting every criticism, every backhanded compliment, every moment Richard made me feel less than. Some would call it masochistic. I called it evidence. When I met Richard Bancroft at a financial conference in 1981, I was a rising star at Morgan Stanley, one of the few women making waves in investment banking. He was charismatic, brilliant, and pursued me relentlessly. 6 months later, we were married, and I left my position to join Bancroft and Mitchell, the family firm. "You'll have more flexibility here," Richard had promised. "We'll be partners in every sense." What he meant was that I would work behind the scenes while he took the spotlight. My investment strategies, my client relationships, my financial innovations, all gradually became our work, then his work. The pattern was so subtle, I barely noticed it happening. Until I did. The day after our 5th anniversary, I started a second set of journals. These contained copies of every successful investment strategy I developed that Richard had presented as his own. Every client I'd cultivated who now believed they were solely Richard's connection. Every dollar of my earnings that had disappeared into our accounts that Richard controlled. And I started a secret email account, a separate bank account, and later, as technology evolved, a complete digital identity Richard knew nothing about. Not because I planned to leave him, not then, but because something in me, the analyst who'd been trained to identify patterns and protect against risk, recognized I might someday need an escape route. By our 15th anniversary, that escape route included a modest but growing investment portfolio hidden from Richard's view, managed through a shell company I'd created using my grandmother's maiden name. By our 25th anniversary, that portfolio had grown enough to purchase a small beach house in Nantucket, a property Richard knew nothing about, in a quiet neighborhood far from the ostentatious mansions his friends owned in the Hamptons. "I'm going to visit my sister in Chicago," I would tell him when I needed to check on the property. Or, "My college roommate is having a girls' weekend." Richard, absorbed in his own importance, never questioned these trips, never called to check on me, never suspected. The beach house became my sanctuary, the one place I could be fully myself. I decorated it with items I actually loved, not the sterile, impressive pieces Richard insisted on for our Manhattan penthouse. I kept a separate wardrobe there, comfortable clothes I enjoyed wearing, not the designer outfits Richard deemed appropriate for a Bancroft wife. And in a fireproof safe hidden in the master bedroom closet, I kept the most dangerous documents of all, proof that some of Richard's greatest financial successes had been achieved through methods that skirted ethical boundaries and occasionally crossed legal ones. Not enough to send him to prison, perhaps, but certainly enough to destroy the sterling reputation he'd spent a lifetime building. I wasn't plotting revenge all those years. I was simply protecting myself, creating options, preserving my autonomy one secret step at a time. If anyone had asked if I was happy, I would have said yes, mostly. Richard could be charming, generous, even loving in his own way. We had built a life that looked perfect from the outside: luxury homes, exotic vacations, charitable foundation work, social prominence. But as I stood in our kitchen that final morning, watching him dismiss me so casually after 40 years together, I realized I had been unconsciously preparing for this exact moment my entire marriage. March 2nd, 2022. Married 40 years and 1 month. "You've really let yourself go, Meredith." With those words, Richard sealed his fate and freed me from mine. The execution begins tomorrow. This will be my final entry in these journals, as their purpose is about to be fulfilled. After Richard left for work that fateful morning, I moved with calm, practiced efficiency. First, the financial transfers I had prepared months in advance, but never executed. With a few clicks, our joint accounts, containing just over $11 million, were emptied into the offshore account I'd established 20 years earlier through my shell corporation. Not stealing, legally speaking. Just relocating marital assets I was entitled to, though Richard didn't know that I knew exactly how much we were worth. He'd always handled our finances, giving me a generous allowance, but keeping me insulated from the details. Or so he thought. Next, I called Bernard Livingston, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs and one of Richard's oldest rivals. "Bernie, it's Meredith Bancroft." Meredith. His voice warmed immediately. "What a lovely surprise. That lunch invitation you extended last month, is it still open?" "Absolutely. Are you finally ready to discuss that opportunity we mentioned?" "I am. But I'd like to move up the timeline. Is today possible?" 3 hours later, I sat across from Bernie in a private dining room at Le Bernardin, wearing one of my Bancroft wife outfits for the last time. A Chanel suit, pearls, hair perfectly coiffed. I'll be honest, Meredith," Bernie said after the waiter had taken our orders. "When I suggested you might consider joining our team, I expected Richard would block it. He's never been good at sharing his toys." I smiled, sipping my water. Richard doesn't know I'm here. And after today, his opinion on my career choices will be irrelevant. Bernie's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, in that case." He leaned forward. "Let me be direct. We know you're the real financial genius in the Bancroft household. We've suspected it for years, ever since that brilliant Westinghouse restructuring that Richard mysteriously navigated after you joined the firm. That's very perceptive of you. When you reached out last month expressing interest in discussing opportunities, our entire executive committee was intrigued. Bancroft and Mitchell's most successful investment strategies over the past 4 decades have your fingerprints all over them, even if your name isn't on the documents." I tilted my head. "And how would you know that?" "Because 3 of your former colleagues from Morgan Stanley work for me now. They remember your methodologies, your unique approach to risk assessment." Bernie smiled. "You have a signature, Meredith. Like a painter. Richard's been signing your masterpieces, but the brushwork is unmistakably yours." For a moment, I felt a swell of emotion I couldn't quite name. Recognition. After 40 years of being invisible, of watching Richard take credit for my work, someone had seen me. "I'm offering you a senior partnership," Bernie continued. "Your own team, complete autonomy, and a compensation package that will make whatever Richard's been giving you look like pocket change." "I'm 65, Bernie. Most people my age are retiring, not starting over." "Bullshit." He grinned. "You've got 20 good years left, and we both know it. Unless you're planning to spend your newfound freedom sitting on a beach somewhere." I thought of my Nantucket house, the peaceful sanctuary awaiting me. Perhaps occasionally. But I find I'm not quite ready to let myself go completely. "Then let's discuss terms." He signaled the waiter for more wine. "And perhaps you can give me a hint about what's prompted this sudden change. I assume it has something to do with that husband of yours." I smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say Richard recently made a critically poor investment decision. His most valuable asset is about to be dramatically devalued." By 3 p.m., I had accepted Goldman Sachs' offer. A partnership role with compensation that would indeed make Richard's generous allowance look pathetic, plus equity options that acknowledged the value of the client relationships I would bring with me. Clients that Richard believed were unshakably loyal to him. By 4 p.m., I had sent personalized emails to 20 of Bancroft and Mitchell's largest clients, individuals and corporations I had cultivated and managed for decades, though most communicated primarily with Richard. "Dear Manager, after 40 years with Bancroft and Mitchell, I will be joining Goldman Sachs as a senior partner, effective immediately. While this change may come as a surprise, I want to assure you that my commitment to your financial success remains unwavering. As you may know, I have been personally managing your portfolio and investment strategy for 40 years, working closely with you to achieve the results you've come to expect. I would be honored to continue our relationship in my new position. I'll be reaching out in the coming days to discuss this transition and address any questions you may have. In the meantime, please know that I deeply value our relationship and look forward to our continued success together. Warmest regards, Meredith Bancroft, Senior Partner, Goldman Sachs. By 5 p.m., I had returned to our penthouse to pack the few personal items I wanted to take with me. Clothes that Richard hadn't selected, jewelry inherited from my mother, the 40 journals documenting our marriage, and a thumb drive containing copies of certain financial documents that Richard wouldn't want made public. Everything else, the designer wardrobe, the expensive furnishings, the trappings of my life as Mrs. Richard Bancroft, I left behind. They had never really been mine anyway. My final act before leaving was to place a single item on Richard's pillow, a manila envelope containing divorce papers already prepared by an attorney Richard didn't know existed, along with a note. Richard, after 40 years of marriage, I've decided to make more of an effort. Not to meet your standards, but to reclaim my own. By the time you read this, our joint accounts will have been transferred to secure my fair share of our marital assets. Your clients will have been notified of my departure from Bancroft and Mitchell and my new position at Goldman Sachs. I have taken nothing that isn't legally mine, but I have taken everything that is truthfully mine, including my dignity, my identity, and my future. Enclosed are divorce papers that offer you a clean, private separation. I suggest you sign them promptly. Should you choose to fight me on this, be aware that I have 40 years of documented evidence regarding certain business practices at Bancroft and Mitchell that would not withstand public scrutiny. You once valued me for my mind. Perhaps you should have remembered that before dismissing me for my appearance. Goodbye, Meredith. I took one last look around the penthouse that had been my gilded cage for 4 decades. Then I walked out the door, stepped into the waiting car, and directed the driver to take me to my beach house in Nantucket, the home Richard never knew existed, purchased with money he never knew I had. As Manhattan receded behind me, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only a curious lightness, as if I'd set down a burden I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. Richard Bancroft was about to discover exactly who he had been married to all these years. And I was about to discover who I could be without him. Richard called 17 times that first night. I didn't answer. He left increasingly desperate voicemails, his tone evolving from confused to angry to panicked as the hours passed and the reality of what I'd done sank in. Meredith, what the hell is this? Call me immediately. This is completely unacceptable. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now come home so we can discuss this like adults. Do you have any idea what you've done? Goldman Sachs? Are you out of your mind? Call me, Meredith. The banks are saying the accounts are empty. If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. Call me. Morgan Stanley just called to confirm they're moving their business to Goldman. What did you tell them? What the hell are you doing, Meredith? Please call me. We can work this out. Whatever I did, whatever I said, I'm sorry. Just please call me back. I listened to each message once, then deleted it. 40 years of being the perfect corporate wife had taught me how to read between lines, how to hear what wasn't being said. Richard wasn't sorry for hurting me. He was sorry he was losing his money, his clients, his control. The beach house welcomed me like an old friend, warm cedar walls, weathered deck overlooking the Atlantic, comfortable furnishings chosen for coziness rather than impression. I slept better that first night than I had in years, lulled by the distant sound of waves and the profound absence of Richard's judgmental presence. The next morning, I awoke to 53 new email notifications. Most were from Richard's various accounts, with increasingly hysterical subject lines. Where are you? This is financial theft. I'll have you arrested. Please, Meredith, I'm begging you. 3 were from Bancroft and Mitchell's corporate counsel, attempting to sound threatening while clearly panicking about potential client flight. I deleted those without reading the full contents. 6 were from clients I'd contacted yesterday, confirming they would be following me to Goldman Sachs. 4 more were from clients I hadn't even reached out to yet, who had heard through the grapevine and wanted to ensure they could continue working with me. And 1 was from Sarah Bancroft, Richard's sister. Meredith, I just got off the phone with a hysterical Richard who claims you've lost your mind, stolen his money, and disappeared. Knowing my brother as I do, I suspect there's considerably more to this story. Whatever Richard did to finally push you over the edge, I can only say it's about damn time. Mother always said you were too good for him, and I've spent 40 years watching him take you for granted. If you need anything, support, a witness to his behavior, or just someone to have a celebratory drink with, I'm here. With admiration, Sarah, I smiled, remembering why I'd always liked Sarah despite Richard's attempts to keep us at arm's length. She saw clearly that one. Over the next 3 days, I settled into my new life while Richard's world imploded. Through discreet inquiries and the occasional text from Sarah, I gathered that 17 of Bancroft and Mitchell's 20 largest clients had already confirmed they were moving their business to Goldman Sachs to continue working with me. Richard had been forced to call an emergency board meeting to explain the client exodus and the sudden depletion of our personal accounts. He had initially tried to claim I was having some sort of mental breakdown, but that narrative collapsed when Goldman Sachs announced my new senior partnership role. The divorce papers remained ensigned on his bedside table, while he desperately tried to figure out how to fight me without risking exposure of the questionable practices documented in my journals. On the 4th day, the calls and emails stopped. In their place came a single text message. You've made your point. I'll sign the papers. But I want to see you one more time, face to face. I deserve that much. I considered ignoring it. I owed Richard nothing, certainly not closure or explanation. But something in me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a desire for final liberation, wanted to see his face when he realized exactly who he had underestimated all these years. 1 meeting. Public place.
No loaders.
Friday, 1 p.m., the grill on 52nd. I chose the restaurant deliberately. It was where we'd had our first date, where he'd proposed, where we'd celebrated countless anniversaries and business victories. A place laden with memories, all carefully curated by Richard to build the narrative of our perfect life together. How fitting that it would be where that narrative finally collapsed. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed not in my usual Bancroft wife uniform but in a sleek, modern pantsuit I'd purchased in Nantucket, sophisticated yet comfortable, professional without being stuffy. My silver hair, which Richard had increasingly suggested I color, was styled in a chic, confident cut that framed my face rather than hiding my age. I looked like exactly what I was, a successful, powerful woman in her 60s who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. Richard arrived precisely on time, his punctuality being one of his few genuinely admirable traits. He spotted me immediately, and I watched his expressions cycle through shock, confusion, and something approaching fear as he approached my table. Meredith, he said, remaining standing though, I gestured toward the chair across from me. You look different. I feel different, I replied calmly. Please sit. I've ordered you the salmon. You always get the salmon here. He sat reluctantly, his usual commanding presence diminished somehow. I noticed with detached interest that he'd lost weight in just a few days, and the confident posture he'd always maintained had collapsed into something approaching a slouch. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice low and intense. 40 years, Meredith. 40 years, and you throw it all away because of one comment about your appearance. I smiled slightly. Is that what you think this is about? One comment. What else could it be? Everything was fine, and then I make one observation. Everything was not fine, I interrupted, still maintaining my calm tone. Everything was carefully managed by me to appear fine, while you took credit for my work, controlled my life, and gradually eroded my sense of self over 4 decades of marriage. He stared at me, genuinely baffled. That's absurd. I gave you everything. The lifestyle, the social position, the freedom to pursue your interests, the freedom to pursue my interests. I laughed softly. Richard, I built half your company. I cultivated your most valuable client relationships. I developed your most successful investment strategies. And I did it all while you took the credit, the compensation, and the recognition. That's not, we were a team, he protested weakly. Teams acknowledge all their members, Richard. Teams share the rewards equitably. What we had wasn't a partnership. It was appropriation. The waiter arrived with our meals, forcing a pause in the conversation. Richard stared at his salmon without touching it, his face ashen. The clients, he said finally. How did you convince them to follow you? I didn't need to convince them. They've been working with me all along, they just didn't realize it. All those late-night strategy calls you supposedly handled? Those detailed investment plans you supposedly crafted? The personal touches that kept them loyal to Bancroft and Mitchell? That was me, Richard. Always me. That's not possible. They wouldn't have. He stopped, realization dawning. You've been planning this. All along. You've been planning to leave me. No, I corrected him. I've been planning to protect myself. There's a difference. I created options because on some level, I always understood you would eventually make it impossible for me to stay. Because of one comment about your appearance, he repeated incredulously. I reached into my handbag and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal, the first one from 1982. April 15th, 1982. I read aloud. Richard suggested I wear more makeup to the partners' dinner tonight. He doesn't realize I was already wearing makeup, just not enough, apparently. I flipped forward a few pages. June 3rd, 1982. Richard mentioned that the neighbor's new wife is keeping herself tight and gave me a meaningful look. I've started running 3 miles every morning. I set that journal aside and pulled out another from 1990. October 12th, 1990. Richard commented that my hips are spreading. When I reminded him I gave birth to Jason only 4 months ago, he said other women bounce back faster. I've hired a personal trainer. Richard's face had drained of color. You kept track? All this time, you wrote down everything? 40 journals, Richard. 1 for each year of our marriage. Documenting not just your constant criticism of my appearance, but also your gradual appropriation of my professional contributions. I smiled thinly. The analyst in me likes thorough documentation. Those are private conversations between husband and wife, he hissed. You can't use them. I'm not planning to use them, I interrupted. Unless you force me to. The divorce papers offer you a clean, dignified exit from this marriage. Sign them, and these journals remain private. Fight me, and I'll be forced to protect myself by any means necessary. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. The same courtesy you never extended to me. He stared at me with something approaching wonder. I don't even know who you are. That's exactly right, Richard. You never did. I signaled the waiter for the check, signed it to the corporate account I now controlled, and gathered my belongings. The divorce papers, I said, rising from the table. Have them signed and returned to my attorney by Monday. After that, my offer of discretion expires. And if I sign, what then? Then you rebuild, Richard. Without my money, without my clients, without my investment strategies. You've always claimed to be a self-made man. Now's your chance to prove it. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my wrist, not violently, but with desperate urgency.
Wait, just tell me one thing.
The beach house in your letter, where is it? How did you afford a property I didn't know about? I gently, but firmly removed his hand from my wrist. That's the thing about underestimating women, Richard. We're capable of so much more than you ever imagined. And with that, I walked away from the restaurant, from Richard, and from 40 years of silent documentation. The journals had served their purpose. Now it was time to start writing a new story, one where I was both author and protagonist. 6 months after leaving Richard, I barely recognized the woman I'd become. Or rather, the woman I'd always been beneath the carefully constructed facade of Mrs. Richard Bancroft. My role at Goldman Sachs exceeded even Bernie's optimistic projections. The clients who followed me from Bancroft and Mitchell not only remained loyal but referred new business at an astonishing rate. Word spread quickly in financial circles. Meredith Bancroft, the power behind Richard's throne all these years, was now operating independently and achieving even more impressive results. Richard, meanwhile, had signed the divorce papers as instructed. The settlement was finalized quickly and quietly, with Richard retaining ownership of the Manhattan penthouse and the Hamptons estate, while I kept the beach house in Nantucket, my personal investments, and half the value of our joint accounts. Bancroft and Mitchell survived, though significantly diminished. Richard had been forced to merge with a smaller firm to maintain viability after the client exodus. He avoided criminal exposure for the questionable practices I documented, but his reputation in financial circles was forever tarnished. The brilliant investment guru was revealed to be, at best, half of a partnership he'd never acknowledged, at worst, a fraud who'd built his career on his wife's unrecognized genius. I didn't follow his struggles closely. The 40 journals remained locked in my Nantucket safe, no longer needed but preserved as a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. My Nantucket home became my primary residence, though I maintained a small pied-a-terre in Manhattan for business purposes. The beach house expanded slightly, a new sunroom overlooking the ocean, a modernized kitchen where I rediscovered my love of cooking for pleasure rather than impression, a home office where I could work remotely when I wasn't in the city. But the most profound transformation wasn't professional or environmental. It was personal. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I did something I'd contemplated for years, but never dared while married to Richard. I joined a local gym in Nantucket and hired a personal trainer. Not to fight aging or keep tight as Richard had always insisted, but to build strength and energy for the active life I now enjoyed. "What are your fitness goals, Ms. Bancroft?" the trainer, a woman in her 40s named Julia, had asked during our first session. I considered the question carefully. "I want to feel powerful," I said finally. "I want my body to serve my needs, not someone else's aesthetic preferences." Julia smiled. "Now, that's a goal I can work with." The training started gently, appropriate for a woman of 65 who'd spent decades exercising primarily for weight control rather than strength. But as the weeks passed, I discovered something surprising. I actually enjoyed the feeling of growing stronger. My body, which I'd spent 40 years apologizing for, criticizing, and trying to diminish, began to feel like an ally rather than an adversary. For months in, I added swimming in the ocean to my routine, something Richard had always discouraged. The salt water ruins your hair, Meredith. The cold Atlantic waves were shocking at first, then exhilarating. I emerged from each swim feeling reborn, my skin tingling, my spirit lifted. 5 months in, I cut my hair, not just a trim, but a complete reinvention. The shoulder-length style Richard had insisted was appropriate for a woman of your age gave way to a short, sophisticated cut that framed my face and required minimal maintenance. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not an aging woman trying to hold onto fading beauty, but a vibrant, confident individual who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. "You look amazing," my daughter-in-law Sophia remarked during their first visit to the beach house. "I've never seen you so radiant." My son Jason nodded agreement, though more cautiously. His relationship with Richard had always been complicated, admiring his father's professional success while resenting his emotional distance. The divorce had left him torn between loyalty to both parents. "Dad says you're having some kind of late-life crisis," he said, watching me carefully for my reaction. I laughed. "Your father believes any woman making independent choices must be in crisis. I'm simply living authentically for the first time in decades." "He also says you stole his clients," Jason added, still testing my response. "I maintained relationships with clients I had personally cultivated for years," I corrected gently. "They chose to continue working with me rather than with the firm. That's business, not theft." Jason studied me for a long moment. Growing up, I always thought Dad was the powerful one, the breadwinner, the decision-maker. But it was you all along, wasn't it? You were the one holding everything together. "We had different types of power," I acknowledged. "Your father controlled the narrative. I managed the reality behind it." "I like this version of you," he said finally. "You seem free."
Free.
The word resonated through me like a bell. That's exactly what I was. Free from criticism, free from constant evaluation, free from the exhausting performance of being Mrs. Richard Bancroft. Just Meredith. Finally, gloriously, just Meredith. My physical transformation continued, not from a desire to recapture youth or meet some external standard of beauty, but from a deep commitment to inhabiting my body fully and joyfully for perhaps the first time in my life. Regular sessions with Julia built lean muscle in my arms and legs. Daily walks along the beach improved my posture and cardiovascular health. Swimming in the Atlantic, even as autumn approached and the water turned cold, gave my skin a healthy glow that no expensive cream had ever achieved. I replaced the conservative, muted wardrobe Richard had deemed appropriate with clothes that expressed my rediscovered personality, vibrant colors, interesting textures, comfortable yet elegant silhouettes. Not to impress or attract, but to please myself, to celebrate my body exactly as it was. "You've lost weight," Sarah observed during her first visit to the beach house, 3 months after the divorce was finalized. "Not intentionally," I replied, pouring us each a glass of wine on the deck overlooking the Atlantic. "I've simply stopped eating food I don't enjoy to maintain an appearance someone else dictated." Sarah smiled, raising her glass in a toast. "To letting yourself go, in all the right directions." I clinked my glass against hers. Indeed. We watched the sunset in companionable silence, the October sky painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. After a while, Sarah spoke again, her voice careful. "Richard's not doing well," she said. "The merger isn't going as planned. The clients who stayed are getting nervous. The Hamptons crowd has essentially excommunicated him." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Not sorry enough to help or intervene, but sorry in the abstract way one might feel about a distant acquaintance's misfortune. "Are you?" Sarah asked, studying my face. "Sorry, I mean?" I considered the question honestly. I don't wish him ill, but I don't feel responsible for his struggles either. For 40 years, I propped him up professionally and personally. It's time he learned to stand on his own. Sarah nodded slowly. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." She swirled the wine in her glass. "He asks about you, you know. Not directly, his pride won't allow that. But he finds ways to work you into conversation whenever I see him." "And what do you tell him?" "The truth. That you're thriving. That you look better than you have in years." She grinned mischievously. "That your new haircut takes a decade off your face." I laughed. The greatest revenge of all, looking good without trying to look younger. "It's working," Sarah said. "Nothing wounds Richard's ego more than imagining you flourishing without him." I shook my head slightly. "That's not why I'm doing any of this." This transformation isn't about Richard at all. It's about me. I know, Sarah said, her expression softening. And that's precisely what he can't comprehend. 1 year after leaving Richard, I received an invitation that made me pause. The annual Financial Elite Gala, an event I'd attended dozens of times as Richard's wife, always in a dress he approved, always with makeup he deemed appropriate, always half a step behind him as he worked the room. This year, however, was different. I was invited not as anyone's plus one, but as a featured guest. In recognition of your extraordinary contributions to the financial sector, the invitation read, Goldman Sachs had nominated me for a Lifetime Achievement Award, acknowledging my decades of innovative investment strategies Richard had long presented as his own. I wasn't sure I wanted to attend. My new life was fulfilling, authentic, free from the social obligations that had once structured my calendar. The politics and posturing of such events held little appeal now that I no longer needed to perform the role of supportive wife. But when I mentioned the invitation to Jason during one of our weekly calls, his response surprised me. You have to go, Mom, he insisted. Not for the industry, not for Goldman, not even for yourself. You should go for all the women who might see what's possible after they've been told they've let themselves go. He was right. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become something larger, a narrative about reclamation, about second acts, about the power that resides in women's society has taught to make themselves small. I decided to attend, but on my own terms. No more dressing to please Richard's aesthetic, no more subdued elegance that avoided drawing attention. For this event, I would be fully, unapologetically myself. I worked with a designer, not one of the conservative, establishment names Richard had always insisted on, but a bold new talent known for creating statement pieces for women of all ages. Together, we crafted a gown in vibrant emerald, a color Richard had always claimed, wash me out, but that actually made my silver hair gleam and my eyes spark with life. The cut was daring without being inappropriate, showing off the strong shoulders and arms I developed through my training with Julia. The fabric moved with me rather than constraining me, allowing the freedom of movement I now insisted on in all aspects of my life. I completed the look with a statement necklace I'd purchased with my first independent bonus at Goldman Sachs, not pearls or diamonds as Richard would have insisted on, but raw, natural emeralds set in hammered gold. My makeup was subtle but confident, enhancing rather than disguising the features that told the story of my 65 years of life. You look extraordinary, Sarah, Richard's sister, said when she arrived to accompany me to the event. She'd remained close to me after the divorce, choosing loyalty to our friendship over family obligation. Richard won't know what hit him. Is he attending? I asked, surprised. Richard hadn't been nominated for any awards this year, the first time in 2 decades he'd been overlooked. Of course he is, Sarah smiled wickedly. He'd rather die than admit how far he's fallen. The word on the street is that Bancroft and Mitchell is barely staying afloat. The merger fell apart, most of the remaining clients have left, and he's had to sell the Hamptons house to cover operating costs. I felt no pleasure at this news, only a distant, academic interest. Richard's struggles were no longer my concern, his failures no longer my responsibility to manage or mitigate. That's unfortunate, I said simply. But tonight isn't about Richard. It's about acknowledging work that has gone unrecognized for too long. Sarah squeezed my hand. Indeed it is. When we arrived at the gala, I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety as I stepped from the car. For 40 years, I'd entered these events in Richard's shadow, measured by his status, defined by his expectations. Now I stood alone, to be seen and evaluated on my own merits. But as I moved through the glittering crowd, something unexpected happened. People I'd known for decades, people who had always greeted me with polite indifference before turning their attention to Richard, now sought me out directly. Senior partners from rival firms engaged me in substantive conversations about market trends. Former clients who had remained with Bancroft and Mitchell approached to express regret at not following me to Goldman Sachs. And women of all ages, watched me with a particular intensity, some approaching to quietly express their admiration for how I'd reclaimed my career, my identity, my life. I was halfway through a fascinating conversation with the Treasury Secretary when I felt a shift in the room's energy. I turned to see Richard entering alone, his Armani tuxedo slightly loose on his frame. He moved through the crowd with a shadow of his former confidence, his smile tight, his handshake less assured. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. For a moment, he froze, openly staring at me as if seeing a stranger. In a way, he was. The woman before him, strong, vibrant, commanding attention in emerald green, bore little resemblance to the carefully curated wife he had left behind. I nodded acknowledgement, but did not approach him.
We had said all that needed saying.
Tonight was about moving forward, not revisiting the past. When the award ceremony began, I found myself seated at the head table while Richard was relegated to a table near the back, a reversal of our positions that would have been unthinkable a year ago. As my name was called, and I rose to accept the Lifetime Achievement Award, the applause was thunderous. I stood at the podium, the spotlight warm on my face, and gazed out at the gathered elite of the financial world. Thank you for this recognition, I began, my voice steady and clear. Though I must say, it feels somewhat ironic to be honored now for work I've been doing for over 40 years. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. For most of my career, I operated behind the scenes, developing strategies and cultivating client relationships while remaining largely invisible in the broader industry. That invisibility was partly circumstantial, partly systemic, and partly my own choice, a choice to prioritize results over recognition, substance over spotlight. I paused, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room, briefly resting on Richard's solitary figure at the back. But I've learned something important in the past year. Visibility matters. Not for ego or accolades, but because it creates pathways for others. When women see other women acknowledged for their contributions, it expands what feels possible. When excellence is recognized regardless of gender or age, it enhances our entire industry. I lifted the Crystal Award slightly. So, I accept this honor not just for myself, but for every woman who has ever had her ideas attributed to someone else. For every professional whose brilliance has been overshadowed. And yes, for my younger self, who believed that working quietly in the background was the only option available. The applause that followed was led most enthusiastically by the women in the audience. Women of all ages who perhaps recognized in my story echoes of their own experiences. As I returned to my seat, I caught Richard watching me, his expression unreadable from a distance. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old impulse, to worry about his feelings, to manage his experience, to make myself smaller to accommodate his ego. I let the impulse pass through me and dissolve. Richard's feelings were no longer my responsibility. His comfort was no longer my priority. His narrative was no longer mine to maintain. After the ceremony concluded and the formal dinner gave way to cocktails and mingling, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers and potential ments. I was deep in conversation with a promising young analyst when I felt a presence at my elbow. Meredith. I turned to find Richard standing there, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, his expression a complicated mix of emotions I could no longer decipher, or perhaps no longer cared to. Richard, I acknowledged with a polite nod. Congratulations on the Lextech acquisition. I hear it was quite the coup. He seemed momentarily surprised that I was aware of his firm's recent activities, then shrugged. It's keeping us afloat. For now. He glanced at the young analyst. Would you mind if I spoke with my wife ex-wife, privately for a moment. The analyst looked to me for guidance. It's fine, I assured her. We'll continue our conversation later. As she moved away, Richard and I stood in awkward silence, two people who had shared a bed for 40 years, now virtual strangers. You look. He hesitated, searching for the right word. Different. I am different, I agreed simply. The emerald. He gestured vaguely at my gown. I always told you it wasn't your color. You were wrong, I said, not unkindly. About that and many other things. He nodded slowly, accepting this truth without argument, perhaps the first time in our relationship he had done so. I've lost everything, Meredith, he said finally, his voice low. The clients, the firm's reputation, the Hamptons house. Even Jason barely returns my calls anymore. I regarded him steadily, neither offering comfort nor expressing satisfaction at his downfall. I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. Could we? He hesitated. Would you consider coming back? Not as my wife, I know that ship has sailed. But as a business partner, a consultant. Anything. I need you, Meredith. And there it was, the acknowledgement I had waited decades to hear. I need you. Not want, not love, but need. Recognition, finally, of my value. But it came too late, motivated not by respect but by desperation. No, Richard, I said gently. I've built something new now. Something that's truly mine. I understand, he said, though his expression suggested otherwise. I just thought, given our history is precisely why I must decline, I replied. I spent 40 years being needed by you without being valued by you. I've learned the difference now. He nodded, accepting defeat with more grace than I had expected. As he turned to leave, he paused. The beach house. Is it everything you hoped it would be? I smiled, genuinely this time. More. It's everything I am. I'm glad, he said, and for once I believed him. You deserve it, Meredith. You always did. As he walked away, disappearing into the crowd, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had truly closed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and meaningful conversations. When I finally departed, stepping into the warm spring night, I felt lighter somehow, as if the last invisible tether binding me to my old life had finally been severed. 2 years after leaving Richard, my life had found its rhythm. 3 days each week at Goldman Sachs, where I had recently launched a mentorship program for women in finance. The remainder at my beloved beach house, now expanded to include a guest cottage for when Jason, Sophia, and their children visited. The journals documenting 40 years of minimization remained locked in my safe, a testament to where I'd been but no longer a blueprint for where I was going. My new story was being written day by day, in choices made freely, in strength claimed proudly, in possibilities embraced eagerly. On this particular evening, the 2nd anniversary of my departure from my marriage, I sat on my deck with a glass of crisp white wine, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The late summer air carried the scent of salt and distant bonfires, a gentle breeze lifting my now silver-white hair. I wore comfortable linen pants and a loose cotton sweater against the evening chill. Clothes chosen for my pleasure alone, not to meet someone else's standards. My body, strengthened by 2 years of training focused on power rather than appearance, felt more like home than it had in decades. The phone beside me buzzed with an incoming text from Jason. Dad's firm declared bankruptcy today. Thought you should know. I set the phone down without replying immediately. Richard's final business failure was not unexpected. The financial world had been whispering about Bancroft and Mitchell's imminent collapse for months, but it still evoked complicated emotions. Not satisfaction or triumph, but a kind of melancholy recognition of how far he had fallen without me there to prop him up. I would respond to Jason later, expressing appropriate sympathy while maintaining my boundaries. Richard's financial troubles were his own now, not mine to solve or soften. As the last light faded from the sky, I heard the sound of tires on gravel, my dinner guest arriving right on time. I rose to greet Daniel Westfield, a widowed former client who had followed me to Goldman Sachs and, over the past year, had become something more than a client or friend. "Beautiful evening," he remarked as he joined me on the deck, handing me a bouquet of local wildflowers rather than the formal arrangements Richard had always insisted on. "It is," I agreed, accepting the flowers with genuine pleasure. "Though I hear the markets had a rough day." "Bancroft and Mitchell?" he guessed, settling into the chair beside mine. "News travels fast. Jason texted me." I explained. "I haven't responded yet. I'm not quite sure what to say." Daniel considered this. "The truth, perhaps? That you're sorry for Richard's professional setback, but confident he will rebuild, just as you did when forced to start over." I smiled at his insight. "That's precisely right. Empathetic, but boundaried." "Speaking of rebuilding," Daniel said, reaching for my hand, "I've been thinking about your mentorship program at Goldman Sachs." "Oh." I turned toward him, curious. "It's brilliant, but limited in reach. What if you expanded it into something larger? A foundation, perhaps, focused on women re-entering the workforce after significant life changes, divorce, widowhood, empty nest." The idea resonated immediately. Using my story as a framework, I mused. Not just financial sector focused, but across industries. "Exactly," he nodded enthusiastically. "You're uniquely positioned to speak to women who are reclaiming their professional identities later in life. Who better to guide them than someone who has navigated that journey so successfully?" As we discussed the possibilities over dinner, I felt a familiar spark, the excitement of building something meaningful, something that would outlast me, something that would transform my personal journey into a pathway for others. 3 days later, I received an unexpected letter forwarded from my Manhattan address. The return address showed Richard's new apartment, a modest condominium in a building far less prestigious than our former penthouse. I almost didn't open it. What could he possibly say that would matter now? But curiosity prevailed, and I sliced the envelope with a silver letter opener, one of the few items I'd taken from our shared home. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Richard's familiar handwriting more shaky than I remembered. "Meredith, today I signed the final bankruptcy papers for Bancroft and Mitchell. The firm that bore my name for 40 years is officially dissolved. I've accepted a teaching position at Columbia Business School, a significant step down from where I once stood, but perhaps where I belong now. I find myself thinking of you often these days. Not with bitterness or resentment as you might expect, but with a strange sort of gratitude. You were right to leave. You were right about all of it, my taking credit for your work, my failure to value your contributions, my obsession with appearances over substance. The irony is not lost on me that in trying to control how you looked, I failed to truly see you at all. What you called letting yourself go was actually you becoming more fully yourself, something I witness from afar now with genuine admiration. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your leaving taught me more than 40 years of staying ever could have. Too late for us, perhaps, but not too late for me to finally recognize the extraordinary woman who spent 4 decades by my side. With respect and regret, Richard." I read the letter twice, then set it aside, feeling neither vindication nor closure, just a quiet acknowledgement of a truth finally recognized. I did not respond to his letter. Some chapters are better left closed, some acknowledgments better left unacknowledged. Richard's awakening was his own journey now, separate from mine, just as it should be. Over the next year, the foundation Daniel had suggested became reality. I named it Second Act, a place where women could find resources, mentorship, and community as they reclaimed their professional identities after significant life transitions. We started small, focusing on the financial sector where my connections were strongest, then gradually expanded to include women from all industries. The work was deeply fulfilling in a way that building Richard's empire never had been. These women's stories resonated with my own. The years of diminishment, the careful preservation of self in hostile environments, the sudden opportunity for reinvention when circumstances shifted. I shared my own journey openly, not as a blueprint but as permission for other women to reclaim their power, their voice, their right to take up space in the world exactly as they were, not as others wished them to be. 3 years after leaving Richard, I received an invitation to speak at Columbia Business School's Women in Business Conference. I accepted without hesitation, only to discover later that Richard was now a faculty member there. We would almost certainly cross paths. When the day arrived, I felt no anxiety, no lingering attachment, no concern about how he might receive me. I was there to share my expertise, to inspire the next generation of women in finance. Richard's presence was incidental. My keynote address focused on authentic leadership, the power that comes from abandoning pretense and embracing one's true strengths. As I spoke, I noticed Richard slip into the back of the auditorium, listening intently, nodding occasionally at points that resonated. Afterward, as students and faculty members gathered around me with questions and comments, he remained at a distance, watching. Only when the crowd had thinned did he approach, his posture more stooped than I remembered, his hair now completely white. "Powerful speech," he said by way of greeting. "Your students are lucky." "Thank you," he replied. "Most of them are women who've been told in 100 subtle ways that they don't belong in finance. I try to be the voice I wish I'd heard at their age." I nodded, appreciating this evidence of genuine growth. "That's important work. Second Act is thriving," he observed. "I've referred several women to your programs. Former clients who are reinventing themselves." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "That's exactly what it's designed for." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of 40 shared years hanging between us. "You look well, Meredith," he said finally. "Truly well." I am well," I confirmed. "Because you let yourself go," he said, a hint of irony in his voice, not mocking, but acknowledging the profound misjudgment of his final criticism. "Exactly," I smiled. "I let myself go completely. Into freedom, into authenticity, into power." As I walked away, heading for the waiting car that would take me back to my Manhattan pied-à-terre for the night, I felt Richard's eyes following me. Not with longing or resentment, but with something approaching understanding, the belated recognition of who I had always been beneath the facade he had insisted upon. Let him see, I thought. Let him finally see the woman he had overlooked for 40 years. Not for my validation, I no longer needed that from him, but for his education. So that perhaps he might truly see the next woman in his life, should there be one. For years after leaving Richard, on the night of my 70th birthday, I hosted a celebration at my beach house. Not the formal, catered affair Richard would have insisted upon, but a casual gathering of people who truly mattered to me. Jason and his family, Sarah, friends from Nantucket and Goldman Sachs, women from the Second Act Foundation, and Daniel, who had become my constant companion though we maintained separate homes. As twilight fell, we moved to the deck for champagne and cake. The Atlantic stretched before us, painted in shades of pink and gold by the setting sun. A perfect Nantucket evening. "A toast," Sarah called, raising her glass. "To Meredith, who reminds us all that life's most magnificent chapters can begin at any age." "To Meredith," the group echoed, glasses lifted in the golden light. As I looked around at these beloved faces, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, not despite its difficulties, but because of them. Every criticism Richard had leveled, every moment of diminishment I had documented in those 40 journals had ultimately led to this, to freedom, to authenticity, to joy. "You've really let yourself go, Meredith," I whispered to myself, smiling at the phrase that had once cut so deeply but now felt like the highest compliment. Let myself go from criticism. Let myself go from invisibility. Let myself go from a marriage that had become a cage. Let myself go straight into flight. Have you ever been told you've let yourself go by someone who never truly saw you? Someone who valued your appearance over your brilliance, your compliance over your power? Then this story was meant to find you today. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell to join thousands of women who are reclaiming their worth after decades of diminishment. Every week, we share another story of magnificent transformation that proves it's never too late to step into your power. Share this video with that friend who needs to hear that the most delicious revenge isn't walking away from someone who undervalued you. It's becoming so gloriously, radiantly yourself that they're forced to witness from a distance exactly what they failed to appreciate up close.